started? Okay. Oh, let's get started. So we're gathered here on the traditional, ancestral, and ceded territory of the Musqueam people. And today we'll have two presenters, Jade and Ta. Jade will go first. Jade is currently a second-year master's student in my lab, and she will be going on to a PhD in psychology starting this fall. So over to Jade to tell us about her research.
Yay, thank you. Oh my gosh, putting the mic on was like my biggest worry. Hello, hello. Okay, amazing. So I'm gonna get started. I have a feeling people are gonna trickle in a little bit because people are eating pizza and tend to come late. So hello, welcome in. But I'm gonna get started anyways and let people just come in. So if we haven't met before, my name is Jade, and today I'm going to talk about the role of happiness in climate action. So first of all, as I'm sure we all know, climate action is severely lacking. I don't have to get into that with this crowd. One reason for this might be that climate communication is often extremely negative. So for example, this narrative that we need to do something right now or we are all going to die. This feeling is completely valid. I get it. I feel it too, but it's often associated with avoidance rather than engagement. And in fact, a recent meta-analysis with almost 60,000 participants from across 63 different countries found that negative emotions were actually negatively associated with real climate action like tree planting. In addition to this, much of climate communication involves personal sacrifice. So eat less meat, drive less, fly less, reduce your emissions, etc., which a lot of people either just don't want to do or they actually can't even do it. And on top of all of this, rewards that do exist for climate action are often so small that they don't motivate the majority of people, like getting 10 cents for your bottle if you bring it to the depot, or not having to pay 25 cents if you bring a reusable mug for your coffee. All this to say, climate action has become largely synonymous with sacrificing our personal happiness for the future benefit of the environment. But clearly this is not working. So why don't we try something different? The Happy Climate approach to climate action combines happiness science and climate science with the goal of increasing our personal happiness as well as climate action simultaneously. So here we argue that happiness can increase our climate action and climate action can also increase our happiness. For example, biking instead of driving reduces over 2,000 kilograms of emissions per person per year, but it also has proven happiness benefits by increasing our exercise. So to examine the effectiveness of this new happy climate approach, we have three research questions. First, how does a happy climate frame influence people's willingness to take climate action? Second, how does a do more good frame influence people's likelihood and happiness about engaging in climate action compared to a do less bad frame? And finally, how does happiness correlate with preferences for probabilistic rewards for climate action? So to answer these questions, we conducted 3 studies, first of which is our Happy Climate Framing study. So this study was pre-registered on OSF, the Open Science Framework, which just means that we registered our data analysis plans before we even collected our data. In this study, 1,299 people from Cloud Research were randomly assigned to one of 4 conditions. Either the happy climate condition, where they read a message that was framed in a happy climate way about climate change, a doomsday condition, which is the typical narrative of hurry up, we're all gonna die, the neutral condition, where it just kind of presented some facts about climate change, and a happy only, where there was no mention of climate change at all, which served as our control condition. So, in addition to this, we used the bubble view technique to track visual attention to the information. So as you can see in this little video, a black mask covered the message and participants had to move their mouse to read the message underneath. This allowed us to track their mouse coordinates as a measure similar to eye tracking and allowed us to see if they actually read the message, how long they spent on the message, and if they spent any extra time on any specific words. So after they read their assigned message, participants were able to choose from a list of 12 possible individual actions, which ones they would be willing to engage in. They then chose from a list of 5 possible actions, these ones civic, the ones they'd be willing to engage in. So things like, are you voting for a candidate? Oh my gosh, excuse me, candidate based on their climate platform. There we go. And then they were also presented with a petition about climate change and allowed to add their email to see if they wanted to sign up for any more information on the topic that they read about. So what did we find? We found a lot. We found that the happy climate and neutral frames were both significantly better for individual actions than the doomsday and happy only frames, highlighting that this doomsday approach really is no better than not mentioning climate change at all. And for civic actions, the happy climate condition was the only one that resulted in significantly more civic actions chosen than our control condition. As for the petition and signing up to receive more information, there was no difference between the conditions. So something else is driving this behavior beyond just framing. To try and figure out what that was, we looked at a climate belief split. So the people who believe more in climate change are in dark blue in these graphs, and people who believe less are in light blue. And we found that for those who believe less in climate change, the happy climate condition significantly increased the number of individual actions chosen compared to the doomsday and the happy only conditions, but the neutral didn't. The neutral was only useful for people who already believed in climate change. And for civic actions, the climate belief difference held across all the conditions, but the happy climate was especially beneficial at increasing civic action among people who don't really believe in climate change already. And interestingly, in the first graph here in individual actions, the climate belief split was important for doomsday and neutral. So people who believed more in climate change were more likely to do more actions in those conditions. But in the happy only and happy climate, that difference went away. So that just means that people in these conditions who believed in climate change or didn't were choosing about the same number of individual actions. So that's to be expected in happy only because there's no mention of climate change there. But in happy climate, that's really interesting, at least to me. We also did this climate belief split for petition and email, helped us explain some of the petition. People who believe more in climate change are more likely to sign the petition, but did not help us explain email at all. It's probably something that we didn't measure, like concerns about online privacy that matter more for things like that. Finally, heat maps were created for each condition based on the mouse coordinate data that we collected with that bubble view technique. So here, anywhere that has darker red, people spent more time on the message. The proportional dwell time, though, on specific words did not predict any of our behavioral outcomes. And in addition, there was no difference between conditions on how long people spent reading the message. So this can tell us that it was likely the content of the messages and not just attention to the information that created the differences that we saw. So overall, how does a happy climate frame influence people's willingness to take climate action? We found that it promotes greater willingness to take both individual and civic climate actions, even for people who don't really believe in climate change. Study 2 looked at a do more good frame compared to a do less bad frame for people's likelihood and happiness of engaging in different climate actions. So in this study, also pre-registered, we had 779 people from Cloud Research who were randomly assigned to either the do more good or the do less bad condition. In both conditions, they were presented with 15 action statements that asked them how likely they were to engage in a specific action. For those in the do more good, it was something that they could do more to help the environment, like eat more plants. And in the do less bad, it was something they should do less to help the environment, like eat less meat. And then after they rated how likely they were, they also rated how happy this would make them feel. So there's a lot here. I'll walk you through it. But overall, in the top left here, we found that the do more good condition led to both a higher likelihood and higher happiness of engaging in climate action than the do less bad condition. However, this was not equally effective for all the actions we tested. If you look at the driving graph, which is at the top third over there, there was actually a backfiring effect. So people who were asked to drive more people were less likely to do so and less happy about it than people who were asked to just drive less miles. Presumably, driving more people is a lot more difficult than just driving less miles. However, the actions for which the do more good frame were significantly better than the do less bad, included food habits, adopting a waste reduction lifestyle, clothing purchase habits, using reusable items instead of single use, voting for a politician based on their climate policy, and supporting a repair policy. We also did the climate belief split here, and we found that for everyone, regardless of belief, the do more good frame was better in both happiness and likelihood than the do less bad frame. However, there was an interaction with condition, so this was especially beneficial for people who didn't really believe in climate change. Lastly, for this study, we ran a mediation analysis and found that happiness mediates the effect of the do more good frame on increased likelihood of climate action. About 71% of the total effect of the frame on likelihood can be attributed to increases in people's happiness. So how does this do more good frame influence people's likelihood and happiness? It increases it for everyone, but especially for climate doubters. Study 3, last one, we looked at how happiness correlates with preferences for probabilistic rewards for recycling. So in this study, also pre-registered on OSF, we had 302 unique participants bring up to 24 bottles per visit to our table in a couple different locations. And then afterwards, they filled out a survey where they got to choose the type of reward they wanted for their bottles. So they could either choose a 100% chance of getting 10 cents per bottle, which is just the standard refund in British Columbia right now, or they could choose a 10% chance of getting $1, 1% chance of $10, up to $1,000 per bottle. After they made their choice, but before they learned the outcome of their choice, we asked them how happy they felt about the opportunity. And then we also asked them how happy they felt after they found out the results. Additionally, we collected the number of bottles returned per participant, as well as if they came back to the study more than once. So here we found that people chose the $1,000 option significantly more than the 10 cent, who would have guessed, and that this is also associated with higher anticipatory happiness. So the moment where you're waiting to find out if you won. Interestingly, there was no difference in experienced happiness between the conditions. So even though no one in the $100 or $1,000 condition won any money, they were not less happy than the people who did. And then for number of bottles, the highest number of bottles per participant was collected in the 10% chance, but it's important to remind us that this is correlational, and a lot of people came to the study already having their bottles and then learning of their options. So we don't necessarily know if the choice led to more bottles or if people who had more bottles were more likely to make that choice. And then we also looked at repeat participants. So we didn't find any statistical differences between the likelihood of returning to the study based on people's first choice, but we also didn't have that many come back. And then we also looked at the total number of bottles collected per choice. The light blue is just for people who came at their first visit, light pink, and dark pink is for people who repeated. So those are bottles after their first visit. So how does happiness correlate with preferences for probabilistic rewards for climate action? We found that people largely prefer them and that they're associated with higher anticipatory happiness, but not necessarily experienced happiness. So overall, the results of these 3 studies highlight the importance of happiness for climate action. If we want to effectively increase widespread climate action quickly, we might want to try moving away from this doomsday, less-based narrative towards something happier and more engaging. We have to consider happiness in our climate communication, as well as the designs of our interventions and our policies if we want them to be really effective. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I want to thank Dr. Zhao, Dr. Dunn, Sophia, Hugo, Stella, and all of the research assistants who helped with these projects, especially the recycling one, would not have been possible without all of your help. So thank you very much. And I would love to answer some questions right now. There was a lot left out because it was 3 studies in 15 minutes. If you have more questions, feel free to contact me. But yeah. Yes, I will remember to repeat them for Zoom, hopefully. Yeah. We did look at that. I don't think we found anything. Not a lot of people won money. We didn't have that many participants. We had 302, and a lot of people went for the $1,000 choice, and the probability of winning that was very low. So we didn't find any statistical differences in whether that influenced returning, but it's a good theory. I think that if we had more people who won, maybe, but yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great question, which I will repeat for Zoom. I forgot the first one. I'm so sorry. Asking about the bubble view technique and whether that changes engagement versus just skimming, which is probably better for generalizability. Absolutely, that's a limit of the bubble view technique. It does kind of force people to engage more than they might without it. However, it is used a lot in psychology and has been shown to be very similar to eye tracking. So that's where people get set up in the lab and have actual things attached to them so that they can see where they're looking on the screen. And in those, they don't have to use the mask. And it is very similar. It is a reputable technique, but of course that is a limitation. We're doing a follow-up study right now where we don't have the bubble view mask as part of it. So it'll be interesting to see if there's any differences. Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great question. I left it out of the presentation because we had so much to cover. But we do the Bonferroni correction for all the p-values. So essentially that just means we are timesing the p-value by the amount of analyses that we ran to eliminate any chance effects. So for example, the Do More study I will have right here. Actually, a lot more of these were originally significant, but after the Bonferroni correction, we times them all by 15 because we had 15 actions. We ran 15 different analyses. A couple of them weren't significant anymore. So these are only the ones that withstood the Bonferroni correction. Thanks. Great question. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, feel free. It's not on the screen anymore, but reach out to me if something comes up later. Thank you.
Yes, after I'm done. Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm very happy to introduce Ta, more formally known as Rapachan Phurisamban, and she is going to speak today about her work on the iconic Mekong River, ethnographic work. You're going to focus mostly on the river and fish monitoring work that she's helped to do as part of her public scholars work, but most of you don't know these other things about Ta. Number one, well, you probably do know this one. She's a passionate activist and often involved in campus and beyond campus politics, especially human rights and Indigenous concerns around climate, the pipeline, and many other causes. And she has a really interesting background. She has a degree from economics at UBC, her original undergraduate degree, which she seems slightly embarrassed about now for some reason. And then she went on to do a public policy master's at University of California, Berkeley, working especially on sort of climate, energy, water policy in the drying up rivers of Central California. And then went to Zurich and became increasingly interested in traditional knowledge and sort of humanities-based thinking. And so that thinking has flourished here, and she's interested quite a bit in relationality and other contemporary humanist theories. So I will turn it over to Ta.
Thank you so much, Terry. I meant to click this on. Yeah, wow, I didn't expect the full introduction, but thank you. I guess I have a bit of time. So yeah, my presentation is entitled When Indigenous and Western Sciences Collide, Restoring and Restoring Mekong Expertise Through Community Engaged Research. Click there. Did I? This right? Okay, sorry. I just want to take a moment to also reflecting a little bit on the land acknowledgements that we usually give. We're here in the Coast Salish territory, including the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. And, because most of us or all of us here are born into sort of, borders, into containers of nation states, we actually need these maps to kind of tell us, where the boundaries are, and, and they're in a way forced to make these maps to tell people like us where their territory lies, right? But they're, Indigenous peoples are peoples of relations, and they're, connected to the lands and the waters, the sky, and everything else, and to each other. And so I think when we do make these land acknowledgements, I do want to recognize as an invited guest here that we do have obligations, to sort of really think about the lands that we're on as well. The very foundation of what this university is built on is colonial. I think we need to recognize that, and also do whatever we can to try to decolonize and to essentially, stand up against injustices here, there, everywhere, right? And this brings me to the second point that, I know this is supposed to be my research, but this is important. And I think this is why it's hard for me to move towards talking about my own work when this is happening, and genocide, that is being broadcasted live, even though it seems like it's across the world, but we are connected peoples, right? And the systems that allow this to happen is related to the imperial, Western imperial powers here. And this is also why, Indigenous peoples have risen up, from Turtle Island all the way through Aotearoa, New Zealand, to stand up with, the Palestinian people. And yeah, so I think this is an important point to make. And I think if we can't even stand up and speak up against, this very horrendous atrocities that's happening, genocide, ethnic cleansing, what chance do we have against climate change or, other ecological crises? What chance, right? And I think we also need to recognize that the media won't tell us what's going on. So we have to get the message from the people there. And there's a whole, if you have internet, you can like get to these voices directly, both, Palestinians and Jewish voices. And it's important to recognize that it didn't start since October 7th. It's been going on for 75 years at least. And it's important to recognize that it's not just a regional conflict, not just a war, it's a genocide. And and so the stories that we accept have power. And essentially that's what my presentation is about. The stories that, we think about science, who has expertise and who has the authority to claim the truth. And so, my question was kind of exploratory. I wanted to understand how my river science and management might look differently if we were to recenter and, restore other ways of knowing and, worlding otherwise, and I'll get to that later. Essentially indigenous science. And so, but, let's be clear first. When we talk about science, it's usually Western science, right? That's, what our university and what's, like how it's talked about and like that's been developed. But thanks to people like Donna Haraway and Sandra Harding, who are, like scholars, feminist scholars of science and technology studies and philosophies of science, that we have to recognize that science is situated. There's a particular history that it's attached to, and sort of the context that it's like the knowledge that's produced is created. And also, with a particular worldview and values. And so, sort of the Western science and technology also have been used as colonial imperial tools to divide and, control both the lands and the peoples. And, that has sort of claims over like what counts as reliable knowledge and who has the expertise and authority, over a particular truth, right? Also, I want to recognize that, Western science is not a monolith, and there are many sciences, and there are efforts to recognize that in a non or less hierarchical way. But then when it comes to the Mekong, the dominant science is still very problematic. And, I'm trying to condense here, but back from the 1800s, maybe I should stand here so I don't have to look back and forth. It started with like the colonial expeditions. Like there are like these French, envoys coming in to learn about how the river works, to try to navigate. And they found, nope, they can't just go from, the Delta, the Vietnamese, like the Mekong Delta in Vietnam up to China, because it's very turbulent, many rapids, but they still try to map everything anyways. And then over time, there's like a shift to trying to measure the Mekong, the levels, try to calculate the volumes and figure out a way to, harness the power of the Mekong for flood protection, navigation, hydropower, all for the benefits of quote unquote mankind or the people there. But then it's still based on this idea of, the river being turbulent and needing to be tamed. And that is true, throughout, like since the 1970s, when these projects starting to materialize as, like irrigation project, but also hydropower, and the river starts to become channelized more in terms of the tributaries. And the first dam on the Mekong was built actually in China since the 1980s, but then it was finished around 1993 to 95. And so right now, this is sort of how the state and, the science, technology, sort of techno-scientific experts would see the river, right? On your right there, it's just, a system of connected pipes and reservoir, and that's how the river works. And that's where they call it like they're managing river traffic or water traffic essentially. because they have like, how much ever water that's in the reservoir, and that's how they work the river and manage the river this way. And this is the same blueprint kind of everywhere around the world, if you look. But we have to think beyond sort of the science of the Western science that we're used to, and seek other sciences that explain and help to understand and relate to the river better. So with indigenous science, Gregory Kahete, the Tewa science philosopher, writes about this, saying that native or indigenous science is a way of understanding the world through a wide range of tribal processes of perceiving, thinking, acting, and coming to know. And nature is a dynamic, ever-flowing river of creation, inseparable from our own perceptions. So there's like so much relationships there, right? That we can't even pull ourselves away. It's not like we can separate, human and nature. And indigenous scientific knowledge evolves from lived experiences with the natural world, with a specific place over generations. And the knowledge is inseparable from central participation as well as the spiritual realms. And the coming to know process is actually, very particular and also systematic. And I'll show you a little bit of that. And my methodology is, the foundation of it is multi-sited ethnography, which is like a detailed empirical study of a particular culture. And then I go through different sites, so it's multi-sited. And I use different methods, from like participation and observing, spending about 12 months in the field, in the villages, conversations, knowing by showing. So I was guided, from walks and boat trips, interviews, documents, and archival research. And also the part that I kind of highlighted there, because this is kind of like a more collaborative process, was community-based Mekong River and fish monitoring, which took place about a year. And with that, there's like sharing circles, or you could say workshops, and biocultural mapping. And oh, wow, yes, I should move quickly. Sorry. And these people, I actually didn't know they're indigenous. I came to know later that they are, from really like getting to know them and knowing that they're Kui people and Bru people in the sort of, in the south of Isan. This whole area is Isan. And I also spent some time there in the northern part of Isan. And the people that I've spoken to are Lao, Taipuan, and Putai. But yeah, so I'll go through this quickly. Some of the things that we did. But so indigenous science has this predictive power, and it's not the same kind of predictive power that we used to. When I talk to these peoples, especially with elders, they have this like deep knowledge, and they would tell me, for example, who's Gui, that when the owls coo loudly, and I'll try to channel him like, "Look, Lan ơi," it's just like, "Children, the fishes are coming, bring the thong and son, which are fishing gear, because the water breaks, as in like, many fish and big fish eat the small fish, and the birds come too." And it's really joyful and animated and lively. The river and the whole area is alive. And the predictive power is related to like how they're reading signs of nature, and they could tell, that's when the fish are coming, when the owls sort of tell them that. It's not immediately, but And in another case, people of the old days carefully observe a lot, and they're accurate. When the egrets fly upriver, the water will rise, and they fly against the flow. So it's just like migratory, like changes, right? But he really said, like Possum said, that nature tells us everything, but not everyone can access it, can access this knowledge. So he talks about like the methodology and sort of like the expertise that one gains as they become part of the place and learn to observe closely, and also learn from their elders. And I talked to another person, this was before as well, from the northern of Isan, who mentioned to me the same things about like the egrets flying, and then mentioning that it takes about 2 to 3 days for the fish to come, for example. I'll move through this quickly, but essentially, because of dams, they lost this ability to predict because the water would fluctuate a lot. And everyone and everything is just confused what's going on. It's this whole systemic change. But yeah, people in the old days, teach us that, and actually it's all true before. And science also says it, Western science also says it in a way that like the onset dates and duration of the seasons have been remarkably consistent and unchanged, at least over 100 years ago, but certainly also the last 5,000 years, right? But interestingly, this way that they're conceptualizing seasons is kind of arbitrary when I talk to these people, like there's, yes, dry season, flood season, but how they actually envision it or think about it is actually like the season when the river rises. I mean, here he rises full bank, but that's actually when the river rises. That's like the season when the rain comes. And then there's a season where the water recedes. And this is like really rich descriptions of what the river, is about during these times and all the things that are happening with, how lively the river becomes at that whole place. And ultimately, he ends his journal here with, the Mekong is a generous giver for animals, plants, people, everyone. And also wanted to mention, because we did this water monitoring, and essentially what I did was just providing them with a ruler for the river, or you could say like, measuring the levels. And just like a tool to write, to take notes, right? I think that's like just what would happen. How would we come to understand the river differently if we actually allowed just these people to write and express, but maybe in a way that, I'm the bridge and help to translate a little bit. And here, because the river is so dynamic and very wide, there are certain like biophysical or geophysical features that they use to tell when the river reaches a certain level, that's when, they can access certain fishing grounds. And they're very like precise. I was very surprised too. Or when the river reaches a certain level, it means that it's too dangerous to take the boat upstreams, for example. And when we have a system that is, dam regulated, the problem is there's so many fluctuations, right? And that really, throws, like I said, everyone off. And at the same time, there's like a new phenomenon that happens, which is it floods during the dry season. And when I say floods, it's flooding the riverbank gardens and all the areas that, they normally go to fish. And it's also very dry during the wet season. And what we recorded was, it was about 5 meters, less than the full bank that they normally have. That is a lot. But I wish I put that map back again when I show how the state sees and how like techno-scientific experts see, because they would claim that this is when there's too little water. It just doesn't make sense, because what they care about is just the volume, and maybe that they could extract that for agriculture. And they mostly put attention to floods because it could like destroy homes, and that's understandable. But Meiyai helps to explain that actually, like, of course she doesn't like floods, but natural floods are great. I like natural floods, because when we naturally we don't have dams, my child, when it's a 6 month, that's when the water rise. And when there's a season for it and water falls, and then that allows them to, really like harvest and like go on with their, practices. And also as important is when Posa talks about like the river being alive, because she can feed humans, animals, plants, and everything. and she's full of life. And this helps to explain why like certain technologies and systems just, doesn't really work. And even though and this is just an example of how the fluctuations have caused just widespread, like loss of habitats, because these plants that are, riparian plants that are good with when the water gets full and they kind of are fully submerged during that season, they actually die from flooding because of dam-induced flooding. And this is like massive area, especially in southern Laos, but I don't have pictures because I didn't go there. And I wanted to just touch on quickly how Indigenous science and that process of coming to know is so tied to the spiritual realm. And at the heart of it is actually, recognizing that it's the natural world and the spirits in, those places that have sort of the ultimate authority, right? And that's who we should really listen to. And that's sort of like the world that, they pay respect to and reciprocate and make offerings to. So I kind of want to quickly talk about like, does this science make sense after hearing all this? This is, from 2017, designing river flows to improve flood security, and it was published in Science. And they're showing like some good designs and some bad design, and obviously good means better than bad. But it, after explaining what I've said, like this would destroy like the riverbanks and all that, people have, all the boats, the fishing gear, everything, because it's just so drastic. And I don't know how the fish would, even survive this kind of big jump. And like these small fluctuations, that's not good either, because when it's dry season, the water should just recede. That's how people can, slowly grow things along the riverbanks. So yeah, different sciences build different worlds. And I think it's important, to restore and reclaim that expertise for Indigenous, ethnic, and land-based communities. And their science is based on, like living with the land. And also refocusing on relations as basis of analysis and, using that as ethical guidance, and how we might uphold the generative and sacred powers of the rivers, of this life-giving, mother. And also, beyond knowledge production, we need to reconfigure governance structures, right? And even the word governance, sometimes I feel like river governance, but if river is a mother, like how do you govern your mother? Like that feels weird to me. But yeah, we need legal pluralism and also Indigenous ethnic revitalization, resurgence, and to support their self-determination. I know I'm out of time, so yeah, thank you. Yeah, any questions from, yeah.
Thank you, Tyler. I understand that a lot of Western science spoke about a very but I wonder the predictions from
Mm.
of like, on the foods and fish con. Essentially, it's learning regularities about nature. And what they do is actually they are making hypotheses. Oh, I think when this happens, when this follows, right? That's essentially a scientific, right?
Yeah.
Testing a hypothesis of life.
Yeah, yeah.
So I wonder if there's a way more productive going forward.
I think because Indigenous science is so tied to like the other relations that they have, right? And it's tied to their governance and self-determination and all that. So I don't think we can take like bits and pieces of what they know and try to like make it fit within sort of like what we think is, like how we work here. So I think it has to come from like just deep collaboration. And a lot of it is like sort of the reorientation of how we are going to work together to support their like fights for like land back, for example, and like support their communities, and then like work together towards like this world that we think everyone is livable, and we have like more equal rights and just. And I think it just takes a lot of relationship building, and kind of, I think Western science needs to be more humble too, because like so trained into like that objective truth and just like who gets to speak. And these people, are seen as uneducated, or like they're illiterate, but like they know so much, and the kinds of knowledge that they have is so rich and it's just different. And I think it's modern schooling that is problematic, because that trains them out of being in the land, on the land, right? So I think we also need to like rethink what we value, that in relation to what these colonized people are experiencing. Jess? Oh, sorry, I sorry for Zoom people, I didn't repeat the question, but I'll. Mm. Mm. So the question is about like negative social impacts and whether dams are for the people here or other places. I think this is true for many, in most cases where there's indigenous resistance. And this is true, where I work as well. Because the claim, as I mentioned, at the beginning, we are born into nation states, right? And this is our land, like this whole area. And so it's the same claims that's used to say, okay, this dam is for all of us, for all the Thai people, or whoever live in that region. But the effect of it's locally, that's not true, right? Like these people won't really benefit from dams. On the other, it's the opposite. Dams are like tools of erasure, and taking them, and ecocide in a way too, and taking them away from their like land-based and river-based practices and livelihoods. So yeah, I think it's clear on the ground, like the problems of dams. I think it's harder to communicate to people outside because they still tied to like that notion of like, oh, the benefits, we need to modernize and to develop, right? And this is the dams, help that because they provide hydropower and electricity. But like who benefits really is just the industries that really draw, and maybe growing cities. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, question? Cool. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. How can we convince the government to recover? Oh, okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think maybe I see this as an opportunity where, Western science, working with indigenous science, can help change the narrative, right? And like re-story, what that land used to be and what it should be, and who has expertise to claim it. And how do we tell the government? I don't know. I mean, like I said, that's why I brought up Palestine. Like, how can we tell the government to not, enable it, right? And I do believe in the power of the people, organizing and like working together. I think that's what it ultimately comes to me. Like, they're not going to change their interest. And even though we say, we have Western democratic society, is it really, does it work, right? So I think it's just, yeah, it's an uphill battle, but like we just have to work together. And but also putting the interests of like the people who actually deserve, you know, the colonized people, the indigenous people at the heart of it too, because they know, and we have to listen to them more and let them speak. Yeah. Oh, oh, yeah. Mhm. Mm. Mhm. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think. Mm. Mm. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Right, right. Yeah, so how do we think about sort of potential harms, right? And some of these, like, you know, thinking about, you said superstition, or, you know, and also the comment about like the dichotomous framing. Um, I think I kind of frame it this way because Western science is the dominant science now. And I mean, I think it's sort of easier, I guess, to talk to like this dominant way of doing or producing knowledge versus like the more the ones that are like kind of invisibilized and being usually framed as traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous knowledge, but there's like a scientific process related to it, or like the systematic, you know, process of coming to know. And I think I don't have a good answer to that, but maybe, you know, I should think about it more. I do think that yes, there are many sciences, um, and even like anti-colonial science. I'm sure there's like some blend there too, right? And like trying to take, nothing is, when I speak of these, it's not like just in a, you know, container, but it's just, you know, there are some core um, characteristics of it that I want to point to. And like indigenous science in the Mekong is very different. It's probably quite different from like indigenous science here, although they have shared, you know, core characteristics about observation being there, you know, for generations. Um, and to the point about superstition, I think it's hard to say without like experiencing it yourself, and to be able to like separate like, you know, the spiritual connection to the land and, you know, nature, and to place, and what is sort of created to maybe like take advantage of people's sort of vulnerabilities, when they feel like they need to ask for something, you know, ask higher powers, and they are like taking advantage because of that. Yeah, I think I don't really know, you know. It's more like I know this case because I'm close to them and I've like spent time with them, and I realize like even within this, like, you know, who do you sort of like worship or trust in the spiritual realm. I think there's like some protocols that has been passed down, and I think it's deeper than like maybe everyday wisdom of like, oh, don't go out. I think it goes deeper than that, but yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good way of explaining it. Oh yeah, do we have one more, or maybe after? Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. You have to be very careful, and it's contextual. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you.